Welcome back to Dino's Garage for the FZ6. Now, as we know from the last video, the bike seems to have a problem with the ECU, or at least that's what I alluded to, because the bike doesn't start. Let's just take a look at what the bike currently does. The bike just turns over and just doesn't start. So it would seem that there's no spark or possibly no fuel. Now we can hear the fuel pump kick in, so we know possibly that there is fuel getting to the throttle bodies, but perhaps there's no spark, and there is no spark because the ignition system isn't allowing that. Now the hope is, having received from China a modulator which basically tells the bike to override the signal coming from the ignition system. This is the modulator, and as you can see, it just simply plugs into here, which is the original wiring connector that goes from your ignition ring down just underneath the tank to the left of the airbox. So that's where you'll find that connector. You simply disconnect the original wiring, connect in the modulator, and then that should speak to the ECU. The ECU should then receive a signal to go, and the bike should crank over and start and get a spark to start. But that doesn't seem to have worked, unfortunately. Now at the moment, even with the modulator, we have the flashing immobilizer sort of key light on the dashboard. Now when I turn the ignition on, that light goes out, so it's as if the modulator is telling the ignition system it's fine, you no longer have an issue with the actual key. But I still have this high flashing up here, which is basically the temperature gauge saying that it's high, which it clearly isn't. The bike's not even started and been running. But also the other issue, still with the modulator in place. Now if I press my fingers on these two buttons here, the reset and the select, turn on the ignition, that high is still flashing, and if we wait for several seconds, 5-7 seconds or whatever, the bike should go into diagnostic mode, and it still doesn't. So we're back to really me hoping that when I sent off another ECU that got sent off in replacement of this current ECU, that ECU's been flashed back to its virgin state. So the hope is that I will put in my red key. That red key will then, via the ignition system, having unplugged the modulator, via the ignition system, speak to the ECU. The ECU will pick it up as if it was a new bike and basically burn that chip code into the ECU as being the correct key for the ECU to then tell the bike to start. So let's hope that that is the case. We now need to get on and see whether or not this is going to start today. So let's get cracking. So here is our old ECU, and that's bolted down there, so I need to undo that bolt. As I say, battery is disconnected, and I can unclip and remove the wiring that goes into that. So that's our old ECU, the one that's already in there, and you can see it's already been previously tampered with. The problem is I don't know who tampered with it and quite what they've done, but it's clearly been opened up and something's been done with it. For all I know, Moto Matrix has already done the same to this and it didn't work, but I have to try these things to find out if it will work by starting afresh. So there we go, that's the ECU back in place there, the replacement one. I need to reconnect the fuel tank wires so we have the fuel pump working. Those are the white and brown wires there. They connect to the two connectors at the bottom of the petrol tank. then basically we can check and see what happens once I reconnect the battery. Right, so this is it, moment of truth time. Batteries connected, new replacement ECUs in there. So we've got to hope now that the key in this, the red key, gets read to the ECU and there are changes, something different, and then we've got to hope after that the bike starts. But let's look and see if there are any changes initially on that dash. What we really want to see is that high temperature go out, and then maybe I can get into the diagnostic mode, and then we know that there's a difference there already. Then we've got to keep our fingers crossed that the bike does start. Let's get on. So at the moment we've just turned the ignition on and we can still see this HI on the temperature gauge. So in theory having the new key has made no difference, but we have just turned it on for the first time, so perhaps maybe, you know, when we turn it off, turn it back on again, it might go away. We might be able to get into diagnostic mode. Let's just change and we'll check that. So we still got the high, so I'm not getting good feelings about this now, I must admit. It's telling me that there's perhaps another issue, and it wasn't to do with the ECU being chipped or even the key reading through the ignition system, because the modulator change kind of should have done exactly the same as what we've done here. I was just hoping for the best. Let's just try pressing these two in and see if we can get into any of the diagnostic mode. No, no change there either. So it would seem that having this ECU redone to its virgin state hasn't made any difference. Still got the high temperature and still no change. Can't get into diagnostic mode. Let's try starting it anyway. I'm hearing it almost try to start a little bit of something, but that could be, well, just spray the easy start into the top of all of the throttle bodies, and well, in theory if the easy start makes it start, it's getting a spark, so you'd then assume then it's a fuel problem, not a spark problem. Interesting. So it almost started and now I've got low instead of high. Clean. It may not be starting because it simply hasn't got 4 plugs in decent condition that are clean and good to go. So back to basics with this, and as always, stay tuned to Dino's Garage and we'll hopefully get this FZ6 started at some point.